Well, welcome everyone. This is the side event on the G20 Interfaith, and we're very grateful for your interest in coming. I have a mic, so I think I don't need this one, so otherwise I would definitely need a mic. But let me just say I want to express special thanks to the IRF Summit for carving out this time that we could meet, because as you know, the schedule has been crowded, but it's very good to be able to have this meeting. Let me just start. My name is Cole Durham. I'm the president of the G20 Interfaith Forum Association. And so I will start, and then I will introduce our speakers. I don't think we have the thing from the summit where everybody's picture will appear, so I think many of you know our panelists anyway. I have to apologize in advance. David Saperstein got double scheduled for this time, so David will not be with us except in spirit. But let me just start out by framing things a little bit and say, why the G20? I think most of you are aware of some of the basic facts, and I'm going to be right within a percentage point or so, but the G20 consists of 19 countries, plus the EU, plus now the African Union as a member. If you think about that, that actually represents about 90 countries. Not that they're all formal members, but that's the situation. But the group of countries represents something like 80 to 85% of gross economic product. For the world. It's about 75% of the world's population, and so forth. So it's clearly an influential platform. It's a little bit disorganized in the sense that the G20 doesn't even have a secretariat, and basically host countries rotate each year, and the host country has a lot of flexibility on what they put on the program for that year. So we've had interesting experiences adjusting over the past 14, it's since 2014. We started in Brisbane, Australia, then did Turkey, then China. You can imagine China was a little bit different than some other places that we've done things. In fact, we couldn't get permission to formally meet. So one of our friends at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences said, well, we're cleared to have a certain conference, so we'll just put you as one of the themes of the conference. And so we got smuggled into China. I'm not sure they might have more efficient ways of excluding us now, but anyway, but it's gone successfully. We've had G20 summit meetings every year since. I suppose there's somewhat of an exception in Indonesia. The R20 group decided that they would take over that year, and so we were deferential to them in the spirit of not being imperialists. And but we actually did a meeting that year in UAE. So we've met every year for the past since 2014, and we've had we learn things every year, and we get, I think, a little bit better every year. So this year is going to be interesting because it's the United States year. And then next year is the UK. We're already working with Lord Russell Rook, who has agreed to be the chair of the local organizing committee for the UK year. And some of you from the UK will no doubt be contacted in the near future. But that's a really good sign because, among other things, it indicates that we're working toward being able to plan ahead. We've typically waited until December 1st, which is when the turnover to the next year is and when they start announcing what their formal program is. And we're working ahead now, so that's all to the good. Now, each year is defined by the host country, their objectives, and one of the things that we see our role as being a group that can help bring the religious voice into expression in G20 policy formation. And in that sense, we represent, I'm not sure it's a totally new form of interfaith dialogue, but it's a focus that's not just interfaith dialogue that's focused on doctrinal issues and comparisons. It's how religious communities come together to work on things that are of concern, that are of great concern to the G20 countries. And the plan for this year, we're planning as there are little handouts on, I think, on each of your seats that describe what we're going to be doing this year. We will have a major meeting in Washington on May 26th, and then another our large forum will be in Utah and Salt Lake City from October 15th to 17th. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through things. I think one of the things that's really important is that there is a genuine link to freedom of religion or belief. I got into this as I was at that time the head of the Law and Religion Center at BYU, and a friend called me up from Brisbane and said, "You ought to do a conference in Brisbane." And I said, "Gee, that's great, and it's only one more conference. What's one more if you're doing 20? And but we gradually learned that the G20 platform is significant, it's bigger, and so part of the impact is having some impact on what the G20 leaders actually decide to frame as issues. But I can tell you as a practical matter, what happens is the religious leaders understand the importance of the G20 platform, but they also get the fact that you have to have some clear priorities of what you're doing in any given year. And it turns out that we can virtually always identify priorities that fit with the G20 countries' priorities, but they also fit with concerns for of the religious communities. Now, for the past 10 years at least, practically every year, one of the major focuses has been aligned with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and so that's typically been something that we have done. But there are other things. But one of the things I would say is that, and some other speakers will talk more about this, all of any goals that they have at the G20 level can be carried out better in countries that have religious freedom. So that's something that's really significant. It's also significant to us. One of the practical things from my standpoint is it's not just that you have opportunities to meet with the leaders. I'm not sure we will see Trump himself during this process, but we'll have opportunities to work with the people a step or two down in bureaucracies that really make the difference. And that's where we can have some real impact. And the other thing, religious communities can be tremendous assets in trying to get things to happen because they have connections from the international level all the way down to the grassroots. So that's very important. So let me just stop at this point and I'll introduce our panelists. First, we'll hear from Catherine Marshall, who is the vice president of our organization. She's also the head of the World Faith Development Dialogue, and as many of you know, is one of the leading figures on religion and development globally. Then we'll hear from Brian Grimm, who is, I always characterize him as being the original author of the Grimm Statistics. Yeah, but Brian has found some other ways to have impact, which he can also talk about. Brett Scharfs is a great friend and someone who has been very patient with me. He thought I was going to retire. My wife thought I was going to retire. But I haven't exactly retired, but well, I formally retired. But anyway, Brett is going to talk about how we're approaching sort of and strengthening the policy analysis this year. Mariana Richardson is our public communications chair for the IF20, and she's going to talk about our AI initiative, which fits into the one of the three goals of the Trump administration. I should say the first goal is deregulation, and my first reaction when I heard that is, ultimate form of deregulation is religious freedom. So, that fits too. And then we'll hear from Eric Lecomte, who has been a great partner and knows a tremendous amount of what's going on the economic side of the G20. And Imam Mohammed Majid is supposed to be here. The conflict is that the Bob Roberts program is going on simultaneously, but he should be coming a little late. So let me turn it over to Catherine. Yeah, sorry.
I guess speaking from the mic might be a little better. I can see you better. What I thought I would do is talk about two things. One is what's the sort of underlying goal of what we're trying to do with the G20 Interfaith, and then a little bit about some of the mechanisms. And then from other colleagues, you'll hear much more about the specifics. So the core issue, which I think is a much broader issue, I mean, there have been books about it, about the fact that for so long, global policy in many institutions, not all, basically had no real mechanisms or no real intellectual framework for bringing religious experience and ideas and teachings and organizations into policy-making processes. And that's true of pretty much across the United Nations institutions, so there's some changes, bilateral agencies in most cases. Of course, there's some big exceptions. But Mark Carney, in his famous speech in Davos a couple of weeks ago, stole one of my lines, which I've been making for some time, which is that if you're not at the table, you end up on the menu. And so the core objective is really not to be promoting interfaith relationships, though that's a byproduct in many ways and an instrument, but to have much more systematic ways of bringing the religious experience, religious ideas, the best of it, into the global policy dialogue. And the G20, as Cole has highlighted, is a very important instrument. In some ways, the G20 serves some purposes by bringing the leaders of the most powerful organizations together in a sort of informal manner that one hopes makes creativity but also decision-making more possible. So that's why targeting the G20, but it is also this underlying objective of finding ways to do that. And I don't think for this audience that I need to be very persuasive, but I think you know there are a whole set of statistics that show, Cole was using 85% of the world's economic power is reflected in the G20. Well, we use the number 84% of the world's population has some religious affiliation. And there are other numbers, some are 87, some are 79. But the point is that it's, despite ideas to the contrary, that religion would become less important with modernization, the evidence is that religious beliefs, religious communities, religious leadership, trust in religious organizations is, if anything, on the rise. Complicated, but on the rise. So that is the first objective, is to try to take this rich experience, the teachings, whether it's welcoming the stranger, which is so fundamental, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but other experience with thinking about resources, thinking about inequality, thinking about relationships between men and women, and of course, the response to pluralism, which in many ways is the core theme in this conference. So how to do that? How to bring the best of the religious ideas and experience into the global debate? And you know, within the G20, there are 13 formal engagement groups, you know, the Y20 Youth, W20 Women, T20 Think Tanks, B20 Business. So there's a whole array of organizations that are in some kind of orbit around the G20 meeting, which really is just a meeting once a year of leaders, heads of state, but it's a much bigger process, and in many ways does things that the United Nations can't do. So that is the objective, whether it's trafficking or inequality or the role of women or the role of youth or all of the issues that are so fundamentally part of the religious outlook, the assets that religious communities bring, the experience, and the capacity for advocacy, and the capacity to communicate a prophetic vision in ways that I worked for many years in the World Bank, and I know very well that some of the most fascinating issues in the world can be framed in the most boring manner. And very, very seldom does that happen in the religious world. So that's sort of why we're here, what we're trying to do. But the second thing is, how do we do it? We're a small organization, very small organization with big ambitions. But the way that we want to work is by building on the extraordinary work of a wide range of networks, which includes prominently this one, the one that's represented here. But there are 30 or 40 different organizations that have grown up that have a host of acronyms that are doing relevant work on peace, on economics, on land reform, on agriculture, food, on climate issues, the Rainforest Initiative. Among them are some governmental, so PARD, which is a German-led, the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development. There's CAICID, which is Saudi-supported, but a multi-country initiative. There are groups. Religions for Peace is the most prominent interreligious group, the United Religions Initiative, Parliament of the Religions, the ACT Alliance, Islamic Relief, the big NGOs, World Vision, Caritas organizations, etc., Tzu Chi, the network of engaged Buddhists. I could go on and on. But our objective is to work within this network of networks by making their views meld together, but also allowing them to be presented in the global platform, as part of the global agenda. So the idea is that we try to draw the best of that, and this is therefore our invitation. And we do that both through networking, in other words, through meetings and events, but we also are increasingly focused, and in this case we have partnerships, a particular partnership with Georgetown University and the World Faiths Development Dialogue, and with Brigham Young University, which you'll hear more about, really to sharpen our capacity to develop the kinds of policy recommendations and analysis that stand a chance of making headway in the context of this complex but important G20 environment and landscape. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So I was at the very first G20 in Brisbane, and I was one of the speakers, and it actually led to a study that I did a few years later on the economic value of religion to America, and then that was the first time that was ever measured. And I won't give you a lot of statistics, but it's $1.2 trillion a year, which would make religion in America like the 5th largest economy in the world, if it were, an economy on its own. So one of the things that I think that the language that the G20 speaks the most is money. And the B20 is what often drives the G20. And so that's what I focus on. So the statistics, the grim statistics Cole was alluding to was when I was at Pew, at the Pew Research Center, then that's where we published, and they've continued to publish for the last 12 years after I've left, annual statistics on religious freedom in every country of the world. And it's measured by the degree of religious regulation. So you're right about religious freedom is deregulation, and we measure religious freedom by the lack of regulation. And so that's all the statistics I'll do. So looking forward, I'll just speak a few minutes on looking forward to next year, because I do a lot of work in London. And there's just a real excitement about what the IF20 and the discussions around the G20 can bring in London. And Cole already mentioned Lord Russ Rook, and so some of you knew him before he was Lord Russ Rook. He was just Russ. But Lord Russ Rook is really a mover and shaker in Parliament and in the economic sphere. And I just saw him up, and he was on his way from here to there. He's in and out of things. But he has an organization called Good Faith Partnerships, and then under that they've set up a group called Free for All. Free standing for freedom of religion or belief for all, just short for free for all. And that has three legs to it. One is business, working with business for free for all, freedom of religion and belief for all. The second is government engagement, and the third is education. So all three of those sort of equal tracks are focusing on what a global initiative on freedom of religion or belief would be. And it's, for me, I've been working on religious freedom, my foundation, Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, and it's great to see now a major initiative having business as one of its three main rails on freedom of religion. And just to give you a taste of some of the things that we're working on, we're going to have a trial run this year in London, actually the same week as you're doing.
But there's not an exact overlap.
Not an exact overlap, but a sort of a bit of an overlap. So we're going to have a summit branded as Dare to Overcome in London, where we'll be hosted by the Lady Mayor. The Lord Mayor of London now is a lady, so it's the Lady Mayor of London, looking at purpose-driven economy and the faith-based connection to that. Then at Salesforce Tower. Salesforce is a Fortune 500 company that works on customer relations software. Probably every organization that's sitting in this room uses them. They're going to host a full-day summit on that same discussion after the breakfast with the Lady Mayor. And then the evening we'll have a gala and awards for Global Business Interfaith Peace Awards that people like the CEO of Intel, CEO of Tyson Foods, American Airlines, some of you may know King Hussein. He's a Latter-day Saint who grew up in India and then came and went to BYU and became a Latter-day Saint. He was one of our award winners. So we'll have those awards. So a very, very much of a business program during that week. And I think the highlight is something new that has the potential to change the whole discussion around faith and the economy, is that the London Stock Exchange is working with us to develop what's called a mark on the stock exchange, like the green economy mark. So if you want to invest in a green, something that's good for the economy, good for the environment, on the stock exchange, you can be certified as a green investment, or green asset, or equity, or something on the stock exchange. They're working with us to have a multi-faith economy mark. And then there's already a precedent for that with Sharia, or Islamic finance. $3 trillion in assets around the world are under management by Islamic financial instruments and institutions. Imagine what the rest of the faiths in the world and the investments in faith-based investment could do. And then just demonstrating that, look how big of a part we are of the world economy, then would help not just give a bigger voice, but also drive more investment into the good that faith-based investing does. So I think we're going to have some, we're softening the ground, at least on that side. But we'll have, I'll just finish with this, we'll have dual tracks, and this is the pilot this year in October. We'll have dual tracks, one on education and one on government engagement. And I met with Brett and Elizabeth Clark, some of you know Elizabeth, and invited them to come and share. And right away their first question was, well, what can we bring? And I said, well, I would just love for you, and I'm setting you up, Brett, to tell your story, because you heard Cole say they go 20 global seminars a year. What's one more? The G20. No, imagine. That is significant. That's not just been a few years. You were doing that before the G20 started. So it's, part of what we want to do is tell the story of what's been effective. And with that, Brett's up next, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm just so, thrilled to have been a small part in this G20 movement and some of the things that they've done around the world. But I think that's part of the message, is that to help others see, look what they've done, and Cole, he's retired. He's not retired, but he's just not paid anymore, right? And there's passion there. So it's just an honor to be part of a passionate project like this. And Catherine's I don't think you get paid for this either. So this is not for this. So this is truly a work of passion, and glad to be part of it. So with that,
I'm going to say, well,
thank you.
While Brett is coming up, I just have to clarify that I understand that Brian's meeting, so point one, it's the U.S. that's the host country this year, UK next year. So we're glad to have Brian paving the way for us. But his conference is, I think, if I've got it right, the 12th to the 14th. Ours is the 15th to the 17th. And we'd let you come a day late, so you could fly. There's a direct flight from London to Utah. So we cooperate. We're anxious to cooperate with good partners. Brett.
I'm the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, but I won't talk about that at all. As part of the G20 Interfaith Forum, we're going to be producing 4 policy reports and recommendations. And I'm going to describe those 4 to this group, largely because we're going to be soliciting expert feedback over the next 2 months on those reports. We will then be presenting preliminary versions of those reports at the Washington Policy Forum that will be held at Georgetown University on May 26th. And then over the summer, those policy reports will be consolidated and improved and put into a sort of glossy pamphlet form that will then be ready for presentation to the world leaders in the G20, and will also be formally presented at the G20 Interfaith Forum that will be held in Salt Lake City, as Cole just said, on October 15th through 17th. Now, each year, the host country of the G20 sets their own priorities. And this year, the Trump administration has set 3. And so the IF20 is tracking those 3 priorities, but in a sense, modifying them to follow what faith communities, what the Interfaith Network, what the G20 Interfaith community can bring to the table to try to influence the direction of how the thinking about those policy priorities might work. And so, for example, the first Trump administration priority is unleashing economic prosperity. And this is viewed as reducing regulatory burdens to foster growth. And so the IF20 policy report and recommendations will be under the title Economic Growth for the Common Good. And the G20 over the course of 2026, with a focus on reducing regulatory burdens to foster growth, will ask questions such as these. How do religious values and practices relate to this priority? Are there creative ways to combine economic growth with social justice and service to the common good? And how is your network or community active in this area? Catherine was talking about how the Interfaith Forum is really a network of networks, and so we'll be reaching out to these networks to ask them how their work has been engaged in doing this very thing. The second White House priority is energy security, framed as building secure and affordable energy supply chains. For the IF20's policy report and recommendation, this will be framed as energy security for a sustainable future. So, again, the questions that we will be soliciting feedback on are, how do religious values and practices relate to this theme? Are there effective ways to combine energy security with sustainability and the progress on climate change? How is your network or community active in this area? So once again, taking the White House priority and then framing it in a way that religious voices can be brought into the conversation and be brought to bear on the way that the thinking on this priority is framed. The third priority of the Trump administration is technological innovation, pioneering new technologies and innovations. Here, the policy report and recommendation will focus on artificial intelligence and the human future. So here, everyone, of course, is talking about artificial intelligence, but we will focus specifically on how do religious values and practices relate to this theme. Are there effective ways to develop artificial intelligence while protecting human dignity and advancing the common good? And again, how are your networks or communities active in this area? Mariana will be talking about this topic at greater length next. But again, soon we will be soliciting feedback from the network of the IF20 on your suggestions for what we should include in these policy reports and recommendations. Now, the fourth report will focus on interfaith engagement around the Sustainable Development Goals. This has been an ongoing, recurring thematic priority of the IF20 over the last more than a decade. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals are about halfway through their projected life when they were adopted. And I believe they were engineered for failure. They were designed to fail. And the reason I say that is because there is virtually no mention of religion and religious engagement in the Sustainable Development Goals. And yet, if you look at those goals, I defy you to identify one of them. There are 18. I defy you to find one of them that can remotely begin to be accomplished without genuine partnership with religion. I don't mean utilizing religion in an instrumental way. I don't mean symbolic engagement with religious actors, you know, the top fancy hats. I mean genuine, systematic, real engagement. And that is what the IF20 has been trying to communicate to the United Nations ecosystem through the IF20 process for the last decade. And so that report will again be focusing on concrete ways to keep the Sustainable development goals and the wider remit of the Interfaith 20 in focus, and could also be helpful in creating the background for not only the annual meeting this year, the October meeting, but the priorities of countries that are likely to be prominent priorities in the future after the United States presidency. And so those are the four topics that will be the focus of the May meeting at Georgetown University. And once again, we're going to be circulating drafts of the framework of these policy papers with requests for ideas, suggestions, and feedback for the drafts that will be prepared and presented at the Georgetown meeting in May. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in any of those topics, to let us know and to be on the lookout for those calls for feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I am excited to talk about something that I feel very strongly about, and that is AI and interfaith. It's something that I don't think we discuss enough. AI is always in the news, but we don't often talk about this intersection, which I think is something that is very powerful and that we need to become a part of as religious voices. I'm hoping in the few minutes that I have to do three things. The first is just to start with some key points that I want to bring up. Second is to talk a little bit about what IF20 has done in past, because this isn't the first time that we've talked about AI. We've actually have about 3 years of experience of bringing AI into the conversation. And then finally, I want to talk about the future. What can we do in the future when we talk about AI and interfaith? So the first thing is I want to talk about key points. These are 4 points that I have felt strongly about that we need to think about. What are we going to do about these? First of all, AI should not be blamed for all of societal problems. And I do worry about that a little bit. Instead, AI can produce answers. AI is not the villain here. Instead, we need to think about what kinds of regulations do we need to put into place, especially as we talk internationally, not just here in the United States, but globally. The second is that religious leaders must counter AI-driven isolation by fostering more human-to-human experiences and connections. This has to do with the youth, but not just the youth, but also adults, that we do more one-on-one, and as either youth groups or adults, that we get together and have more of these wonderful one-on-one experiences. The third is that youth and adults must be taught to critically evaluate AI-generated answers that they get. Now, just recently, actually just yesterday, Manisha Jain, who is a dear friend, but also a lead AI engineer at Microsoft, she's been at Meta, she's been at Google, she's done it all. She has come, I asked her very specifically to give me a 1 to 2 page paper that I can put on our website that would give some critical things that we can do to find out if the answers we get or the deep fakes that we see are true or not. And so she just sent that to me yesterday. I'm excited to share that with all of you. But I do think this is something that we need to help people understand, that the information you get from LLMs, garbage in, garbage out, and a lot of garbage is going into these LLMs, and we need to be aware of what kind of answers we're getting out. The fourth is interfaith cooperation is essential to combat this disinformation and misinformation and intolerance that is happening through some of the answers that we're getting in AI. So these are key points that I hope that we keep in mind as I go forward, talking a little bit about the past, but also the future. One thing I do want to talk about right now in terms of key points is the fact that IF20, G20 Interfaith Forum, is trying this year to set up an AI interfaith task force where we come together with different religions and also technologists that are people of faith to talk very specifically about what can we do when it comes to this idea of regulating something that I'm afraid might be becoming out of control. So in terms of the past, IF20 has in the last 3 years been having this conversation. Basically, the first one started at the G20 India in 2023. With our first meeting that we had in New Delhi, that happened literally 4 months after ChatGPT came out. And so it was interesting to see the conversation because a lot of the conversation was, we don't know. We don't know how this is going to affect religions. We don't know how this is going to affect society yet. It still seems something new. One of the main things, though, that was brought out was that Pope Francis had made a very strong statement just a month or two before. And he said, he stressed these really important things. He said, we must see that AI is accountable, impartial, that it is secure. And he talked very much about personal security, private security, and then protection of the individual. That was kind of the conversation there in New Delhi. Well, about 5 months later, we had another meeting in Pune where we had continuing this discussion on AI. And that one, 2 very interesting analogies came out of the discussion. The first one was that of AI being a Trojan horse. We have now let down the barriers. We have allowed the Trojan horse to come into our homes, into our businesses. And the question is, what's going to come out? Is what's coming out something that's good or something that's bad? And we need to monitor what is coming out of the Trojan horse. The next analogy that I also really enjoyed and came from Manisha, she said, you know what? AI is like a gun. When you think of guns, we need guns in our society. Guns are a part of our society. They help us with political control. They help us in terms of societal control. They protect us. They're also fun. They're fun to use. People enjoy guns. But they also kill people. And so we have to have regulation. The same thing's true with AI. Now, I'm just going to quickly talk about Brasilia and then what happened in South Africa. In Brasilia, the main thing that happened there was we had more of a global understanding of what was happening. And in that discussion, it became a lot more centered on youth. What is happening to our youth? What is happening in terms of their understanding of communication and misinformation? And then just 5 months ago, we also in South Africa met, and at that we talked very much about advocating for AI governance. What are we going to do to make sure that that happens? In terms of the future, a couple of things that I think has made me very excited as I look at the future. I just last week came from a very interesting summit in New Orleans with the Future Life Institute, where we were very specifically meeting together. It was technologists and policymakers to discuss what kinds of regulations do we want. And we came up with a declaration. This declaration will be published on February 11th. I was really sad that I couldn't bring it here with you today so you could see it, but please look at our website on February 11th. That will be published there. But some of the things that were talked about there are answering these questions. How are we going to regulate AI to make sure that it doesn't become something that we say, oh no, we didn't do it early enough. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was that just recently, the Article 18 came out with a very strong statement. And I did want to just share the end of their statement because I think it's something that we need to think about. They said, in signing this statement, we, the undersigned members of the Article 18th Alliance, proactively commit to engage with AI's role in influencing FORB, given due importance to protect members of communities who may be vulnerable. Second, develop and share effective policies. And third, leverage the Article 18 Alliance cross-governmental collaborations. I would say IF20 is very much a part of this and wants to support what is happening with the Article 18 statement, but also with the Declaration for the Future Life Institute. So thank you. I hope you do become very involved in this important policy discussion as we move forward. And as Brett already said, we're going to be making these policy statements and hope that you will also bring your voices to what we're talking about. So thank you.
So while Eric is coming up, let me just stress, so what you're seeing is some concrete areas that we've already identified for priority work. And these are areas that interact with the U.S. agenda, but we'll have greater opportunities in the UK to follow up. But I want to stress what's at the bottom of one of the papers that you have, and it says, expressions of interest through the IF20 Secretariat, and the contact is above, are appreciated. So we're not quite sure how this is going to work out, but we are very anxious to get input on different points. And I should also say, while Brett was describing the overall framework that were the key policy points, it's not like those are the monopoly issues, because there may be some points that, one of the things that's been true over the years is that we can move more rapidly in governments and other institutions. So if there are some emerging issues, we can pay attention to those as well. And there will be a little bit more flexibility in the Salt Lake Forum than in the May event, because we're trying to have a real solid policy framework, but then have adequate room to look at other things that seem really important. So, Eric.
Thank you, Cole. And I want to have a special thanks to Cole and Catherine for their leadership of the Interfaith 20, who over the years have really built, I think, a really successful international consortium to take on some of the biggest policy challenges of our time. So thank you so much. And thanks for all the work of the team from the IF20 and the work they've been doing to build this forum. The story that I'm going to tell are stories that are familiar to all of us. It has to do with our creation stories, hearkening back to the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, but also knowing that in most faith-based traditions, there are similar stories. And it starts from a very special promise that we call the Jubilee Promise that our Creator made to us. That God loves us so much that God created a rich and abundant resource-filled world for us. And we're closest to God, we're closest to one another, we're closest to community when we share those resources among us. That story was so important to some of the early believers, they actually created legislative law books, principles in the Torah for how a just society should live. And while it's debated among scriptural scholars, there are those that argue were as many as 100,000 people in early communities who lived by the law books of the Torah, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, that every 7 years, debts should be forgiven. Every 7 years, slaves should be set free. Every 7 years, the land should be allowed to rest sow and go fallow, so the Creator could provide directly for us, and we regenerate the land. These principal law books were so important to the people in terms of how to live in community and live with God and share God's abundance. We know that at times, while communities practiced and lived the lessons, as we all do, we fall away from some of our traditions and some of what faith calls us to. So God sent the prophets and essentially reminded the people of the laws of Jubilee, to forgive debts every 7 years, to let slaves go free, and to ensure that the land can continually abundantly provide for us. These principles, these laws that were so important for the prophets to remind people of how to live, then became the principal way in which Jesus Christ began his ministry. We read going to the synagogue and reading from the law book, where he shared from the law book, from the prophet Isaiah, the scripture of 7 times 7 years for debt relief, 7 times 7 for freedom, 7 times 7 to protect our planet and heal our home. And Jesus, we know, read that scripture and in the awe of the audience said, "Today in your hearing, this scripture is fulfilled." And we know from the audience there, they were confused. Isn't this the day laborer from Nazareth? And he's telling us that inequality is going to be over in our hearing. This idea of the Jubilee scripture was so important that in 1997, 3 years ahead of the great Jubilee year of Christian churches, where they were celebrating the 2000th birthday party of Jesus, Pope John Paul II made an announcement to the world, and joined by interfaith leaders from the Muslim tradition, the Sikh tradition, the Hindu tradition, the Jewish tradition, and every major faith tradition, he said that now as we celebrate 2000, Jubilee 2000, this special holy year, we call for debt relief for the world's poorest people. At a time when debt meant death, that most countries in the world were paying more to service their debt, often debt that was corrupt, that didn't build bridges, that built palaces. They were paying more to service their debt than they were on health care, education, and all social services combined. Unfortunately, after that call from 1997, we saw tremendous action. But unfortunately, we're in a similar place. Because all over the world, every major religious body came together. Essentially, we won $130 billion in debt relief, which meant that 54 million kids are going to school in sub-Saharan Africa who never would have seen the inside of a classroom. We won new policies on economic accountability and trade and tax policies to protect the vulnerable. The G20's primary focus is looking at global economic issues. And so the G20, again, is going to focus on debt as a major issue during this summit. In the United States, every Republican and Democratic administration has expanded the world of debt relief. And during the pandemic, as we know, unfortunately, countries lost decades of development. More than 200 million people, mostly women and children, were thrown into extreme poverty. Again, we are dealing with the reality that around the world, in the majority of the world's countries, most countries are paying more to service their debt on healthcare, education, and all social services combined. It's the major glooming financial crisis in our world right now that the religious community has continued to take on and continued to work to tackle, because in the North, these issues are specifically tied, the suffering in the developing world, to our high food and fuel prices in the North. When we have countries that are dealing with these kinds of economic challenges, the majority of the world's countries, we know that we need to do better. And we know debt relief tends to be the most accountable form of aid. Working during the pandemic with Ambassador Sam Brownback and other major religious leaders, we won more than $400 billion in emergency aid to develop healthcare systems, build schools, and bolster social safety nets around the world. And that was because the religious community took this on as a major issue and acted. Last year, we joined Pope Francis in Rome with major faith leaders from around the world, where again, the focus of Jubilee 2025 through 2030 is on debt relief and creative economic aid to address inequality and end poverty, to actually change the policies that lift countries permanently out of a debt crisis. And for the first time, Francis and major religious leaders called for major changes in the financial system, the creation of a bankruptcy process to deal with debt. It remains in the United States the last bipartisan issue which people are crossing the aisle to work on. And since the G20 has the majority of votes in the major economic decision-making body, the International Monetary Fund of the world, us being able to fulfill the call from Pope Francis and other major religious leaders is essential now, as we work to build a world where we all have enough, where we work to have the world that was promised to us in the Jubilee Promise, where all are welcome at the table and no one goes hungry. Thank you.
So thanks to the extraordinary discipline of our speakers, we have the time left that we thought we would have. And I want to be able to open things up to questions from the audience, but I might take just a second if there are any of you on the panel who would like to comment further or say anything before we turn things over to the audience. Okay. Well, now that gave you about 30 seconds to formulate. It's great to see some first questions. So let's take two or I'll take three first from you, and you in the back, and well, we can do four. Yeah. So
Do I go first?
Yeah. Go
Okay.
first.
Wow. So when I was 13, I went to my local mosque. I'm a Muslim woman, and I was told I couldn't come to the mosque. And since then, I've monitored trends in the religious sphere. Particularly, I'll talk about my community. Almost 800 million women have undergo a lot of discrimination at the intersection of religion. And so you just mentioned that the SDGs have failed in not mentioning the importance of interfaith dialogue. And as you move forward crafting these policies, I had a team of women who study patriarchy for the last 3 years, and we have come up with recommendations every year to insert feminist theology. Women should have a right to interpret, reinterpret, and not just seek consensus, but mold consensus. So I hope that we will have some kind of verbiage in those recommendations, that women be given theological leadership, not just have organized events, but they should have the freedom and the right and the opportunity to write their theology. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go to the sort of the middle and the. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, distinguished panelists. I have a question. You, sir, touched on the importance of and the core belief that we have to support, we have enough resources to share, and that we should share them. How can you prevent the exploitation of resources in the G20 and other countries? And how can you support, well, that would be the first question. And how could you, I guess, ensure that companies don't have free reign over those resources wherever those countries are from? We have a lot of multinational companies, people who cannot be held accountable because they have a company that they're behind. Investors, investment groups that, they're not tied to any particular ideology. I think their ideology may be money. So how do you protect the people of the world and all of this plentiful resources from those, people and groups that are protected from regulations of any government, as far as I can tell.
Okay, and in the back.
Yes. Thank you so much, distinguished panelists. My name is Leo Igwe. I'm from Nigeria. I'm a humanist, and I serve on the board of Humanists International. IF20 is such a distinguished institution and organization, but for us at the humanist movement, we have always felt excluded, even though we are affected by the matters of interfaith issues. How can we make IF20 more inclusive in matters of regarding faith and freedom of religion or belief, and at least give a space or a slot, for humanists and other organizations that, of course, they have their belief, but they don't identify as having a faith in the strict sense. Thank you.
Okay, and then up here. So
Thank you, participants in this informative panel. I have a couple of questions. One, I've heard you, Catherine, mention a couple of times during this conference the concept of prophetic vision. Now, given my own faith tradition, that has particular significance to me, but I would be interested in your elaboration on what you mean by that. My second question is for Mariana in regarding AI and how that is handled, governed, regulated, if you will, in the face of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, a guaranteed right as well.
okay. Well, I think you sense that this is not a set of softball questions. And, and I'm glad I don't have to answer them. But let's see, I maybe start with Catherine on the women issue, and also the one that was directed to you directly about prophetic tradition, and then Mariana gets the one about AI, and then I'll think a little bit more about where the other two go.
Well, I'm going to start with the story of how I got involved in this business. I was working at the World Bank on international development issues as a country director when the president of the World Bank, Jim Wolfenson, drafted me because he thought that it was a very sensible idea to engage with religious communities. He saw the gap and thought it was a good idea. And to everyone's surprise, including consultants, expensive consultants, et cetera, there was a lot of opposition to this. He would say out of 184 countries, 184 were against it. And so we did a lot of thinking and consultation about why it was that it has been so difficult to engage religious communities effectively in development. And one of the reasons is the perception, and we're dealing with perceptions and reality, but a perception that many religious communities were basically against some of the important changes that are involved in development, and particularly equality between men and women. And that perception drove a lot of the opposition to even having conversations and engaging with different religious communities. But it forced us to deal with the diversity and the dynamics within religious communities, that there is so much change. There are dramatically wonderful women's groups, Musawa, for example, that are addressing and that are fighting for women theologians, for equality at the table. And they are doing remarkable work. So whereas there are some traditions that are really in the sort of almost stereotypes of women staying at home. So I think that if we don't, in our approach to the G20, as representing or trying to represent the vast diversity of religious communities, we have to recognize the spectrum and the diversity of views and work both within the religious communities to bring the best of evidence. Let me give you another example. There is a core of evidence that orphanages are seriously damaging to many of the children who are in orphanages. And so there is now a pretty clear consensus that orphanages are not the solution to children who are in trouble. And yet, there are circumstances in which orphanages do remarkably positive things. So you have to have this complex appreciation. And you'll notice I use the word the best of religion. And one of the principles of the IF20 is that we are working where there are areas of essential consensus, where there is, where we judge that there is enough of a consensus to be working. So an example is the trafficking issue, et cetera. Some of the debt issues, you really are seeing that. On inequality, there's not so much consensus. So it's something we have to navigate. And the perceptions, though, are critically important, because it doesn't do simply to say, oh, religions are all good and everything that they recommend is in the direction of the most positive trends of modern life. We have to see the good, but also be prepared to deal with the complexity. And complexity is one of the challenges that we face. Now, on a prophetic vision, that's a very interesting question. And it sort of harks back to something where someone once said to me, I want to hear more of a prophetic voice from you. In other words, I was challenged to be more prophetic. And what that meant, I think, was to be bolder, yes, to be more willing not to be looking for compromise and for nuance, but really to be forthright, but also to be rising always above and looking more towards the future rather than to the problems of today. But when I talk about a prophetic voice, I'm talking about something that goes beyond the technocratic, beyond our individual, to pushing towards, and it's quite something to ask, to be pushing towards the kind of visions that we have. And I do want to emphasize one thing in closing, that, you know, for most of history, and until very recently, the idea that poverty would always be with us, the poor would always be with us, was true. It was absolutely true. For most of history, most people were poor. Many were enslaved. Many lived terrible lives. But we've been given a gift which is reflected in 20 to 30 extra years of life. And we have the potential, we have the possibility that every child can go to bed not hungry, that we can offer education, we can offer decent health care to everyone. And I think that fundamentally shifts the responsibility that we all have to do something about it. Because if we know that there will always be relative poverty, but the kind of misery that we are still seeing in too much of the world is something that it is our responsibility to change. And I would call that a prophetic vision, perhaps. It's been said many times by many people who are much wiser than I am. But I think that it is this idea that we always remember, leave no one behind, the golden rule, the principles. That's the prophetic vision.
Great. Okay, so while Marianne is talking, Eric, if you could take on how we share the resources, that would be, I think, for you. And then if any of the others of you want to comment on these questions, go ahead, Marianne.
So your question was about AI and the restrictions that would happen and how that's going to be. I think it's interesting. Anybody who's been through law school knows that one of the main classes that you take is that tension that's from the beginning of our Constitution as to how do we balance that, especially when we talk about the most vulnerable, when we talk about those who are underage. How do we handle especially a system that is completely open in terms of communication of positive things and negative things? And so I would say right now what we're seeing is it's being done through lawsuits. There are many large lawsuits that have already happened that has caused restrictions of AI in terms of what is possible for them to do, especially in this expression area. And so realize I'm thinking of two major ones that just happened recently. One was given by 500 authors who went to an LLM and said, you took my words when you didn't have the right to, and you put it into an LLM. It's $300 million. I mean, it's amazing how much money this company got in trouble for. The other one that I'm thinking of, too, in this this summit that I just went to, Megan Garcia spoke. And those of you who might be familiar with the story of Megan Garcia and her son, her 14-year-old son, who committed suicide because of a chat bot, basically a chat character that he fell in love with when he was 13, and then through a year of, and realize when you're talking about children, they, especially when they become addicted, they are very good at hiding addictions. And he obviously was addicted and in love with this chat character. And it came to the point where she won the lawsuit. And if you go right now, you can't do chat character if you are under a certain age. You know, it won't let you. And it's also caused restrictions in other ways. So I do see this as already happening in the courts in terms of understanding what restrictions need to be done. But my concern is, shouldn't we, are we doing it the wrong way? Shouldn't it become policy? Shouldn't it become something that is done in a different way than always through the courts and through punishment? Instead, what I'm hopeful is that we can set up international standards so that this is an international issue that I think we need to work on together.
Thank you for your question. In terms of that idea of sharing resources, just like the early believers had to legislate it, that's essentially what we work on with the G20 and world governments. So it's how do you implement the policies around ending poverty, around global, how do you create global health care? How do you ensure every kid can go to school? How do we finally stop the reality that 1 out of 5 kids under the age of 5 dies in sub-Saharan Africa from preventable diseases? So the technical policies behind all these social goods are mostly debt policies, but also tax and trade and other economic policies. And so it's why the G7 and G20 have been focused on these particular policies for more than 25 years. And specifically, when they're looking at these particular policies, they're actually creating accountability mechanisms. So, for example, around debt relief policies that we've passed and moved at the G20 and the IMF and the United Nations, they're so highly accountable. It's how we can tell how many kids went to school in sub-Saharan Africa from a change in these particular policies. It's also highly monitored. Now, given that, I think your point among a range of economic policies is that many of them are unfair or not transparent. But that's why we really work for transparency in the policies that we seek to pass. In terms of your comment around the private sector, which has a growing amount of debt in developing countries, there is less transparency around those issues, and those are issues that we're trying to shed more transparency on by passing policies at the G20, at the IMF. And some of those are policies we've passed in U.S. law. One of the great ways that some corporations have played the system, stealing debt relief and stealing resources from developing countries, is by being able to hide behind a shell company, or we don't know who the owner is of a bank. So one of the policies that we passed with Republican and Democratic administrations was to reveal the true owner of the cause of this theft resource, of a lot of the facilitation of human trafficking, at least to law enforcement at this point. So it's a range of debt, tax, and trade policies that the G20 takes on that ultimately are the policies that are related to childhood hunger, development, education, and global health care.
Now, as you've seen, we have our final participant just arrived. This is Imam Mohammed Majid. And you're stepping right into a discussion that you don't know what it's been. So you have ultimate ultimate freedom. We asked him to give us a Muslim perspective on some of these issues, and I think you can probably you should feel free to speak, but not more than 8 minutes.
Yeah, you take a risk when you give a clergy a microphone.
It's hazardous, you know. But
first of all, I would like to say it's my honor to join this wonderful panels and panelists, and also to be part of the G20. From a Islamic perspective, that we connect faith to development and advocating for people in need. There's a chapter in the Holy Quran says that the person who have no faith is a person neglect the orphan and does not advocate for the needy. And therefore, it is a must for me as a clergy to involve in advocating for people who don't have. And I just came from Sudan, and I participated in soup kitchen of serving children going to school, and in that neighborhood, 1,500 people being fed every morning, including the teachers. The world can eliminate poverty if they want to. We have resources being wasted around the world, and while we see people really don't have the basic needs. I give example to my community. I say to them, as we trash our own food at home, and we look on TV and we see people suffering in Africa, we need to think about sharing our resources. The world today being divided to the north and the south. The north utilize most of the resources of the world, but people in the south being neglected. There's no reason that children are suffering today. There's no reason that I've seen people in Sudan, children lack basic need, while we have enough resources in this world. It's about compassion, about care, about understanding that human is one family. Humanity is one family. It is the teaching of Islam and Christianity and Judaism that were created from Adam and Eve. And all of us as human beings matters in the eyes of God. And sometimes I just say to my children, the difference between the child in Sudan and the child in America is where they were born. The only reason that the child in Darfur doesn't have food because it happened to be in Darfur. And we, as people of faith, we have to be the conscious and the voice, speaking to wealthiest countries in the world, and tell them that there's enough for everybody. And the last things I would say, so the book of a sermon, one of the commitment we have to make as people of faith is to advocate, to speak, to raise awareness. And that's what exactly this great organization is doing, challenging the leaders of the world to do their part in eliminating suffering of innocent children.
So, yeah, thank you very much for that. I think it's worth just underscoring. I remember being at a conference not so long ago. It was actually something I heard from David Saperstein, who couldn't be with us. He just said, the reality is the world has the resources to end poverty. That's something that Catherine said, and it's you know, we know that like 400 million people have been lifted out of poverty in China. You can say what you want about the Chinese administration, but that's an impressive number. Now, maybe they did it by manipulating U.S. trade or something. It doesn't matter. It shows the possibility, and I think it's trying to understand those possibilities that are really important. And this will be a quick response to your, can we have more inclusiveness? One of our principles as the IF20 is to be inclusive, to include a range of views and to include a range of types of people. Types of people, that's a bad way of speaking, but so inclusiveness is really one of our principles, and anytime we're not fully, living up to that, we should be called on, and we should learn how to do it better. I think we've probably come to the end of our time. I think as I said, we got some non-softball questions, and I think they were good and representative. But let me give everyone on the panel time for just a short final statement.
I think the main message is that we need all of you to focus on the broader objective of navigating this complex challenge of trying to bring the best of the religious experience into the broader agendas of our time, because we have so much potential. We really live in extraordinary times, the best of times. But we also are facing extraordinary problems and challenges, some of them existential, the existence. And so we need to be working together to try to realize our potential and move in the right directions. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we believe that we can really contribute at the tables, at many different tables, in many different ways, on many, many different issues: health, education, agriculture, food, even infrastructure, energy, you name it. We really believe that we can mobilize and bring the wisdom and the prophetic vision, but also the practical day-to-day experience of lived lives into these processes in meaningful ways. And that we need your help to do that.
I'll follow up on the economic system. So Pope Francis, we had a meeting with Pope Francis in 2017, and people were presenting the work they were doing on the economy, and his statement stunned everyone. He said, "We don't need any more Good Samaritans. We need to change the system so there are less people by the side of the road that need to be picked up." And that statement then set the partner, and I wanted to point out Matthew Jones, who's with the Ford Foundation, and Bruce Wardle, who's one of the trustees, and then our partner in Singapore, he and I are both Catholic, Lawrence Chong in Singapore. This idea of having a mark on the London Stock Exchange is to change the economy, that instead of looking, you try to raise money for AI, and people throw billions, if not trillions, at it, with no guarantee that it's going to make them money. Whereas you have a faith-based institution, universities and charities and hospitals and schools, and they're continuing to perform and create the economic conditions that make society work. Nobody's going to throw $1 trillion into that in the current system. So part of what we're doing is to answer Pope Francis's call and change the system by getting the system to have to see this as an economic value, not only tossing money into investments, knowing that half of them fail, or 9 out of 10 fail. So anyhow, so I think the discussion has to move beyond Band-Aids and help for the poor, but the system needs to change, and I think that's what we need to aim for.
Right.
It's no secret we live in a really polarized world, and that there are a lot of centrifugal forces pulling us apart. And we need a few centripetal forces that bring us together. And I believe this IRF summit is one of those types of things. And I believe the G20 Interfaith Forum strives to be one of those types of things. It strives to be a forum that's bipartisan. It strives to be a forum that is inclusive. It strives to be a forum that focuses on best practices, on listening, that is thinking of sort of new forms of multilateralism that can still work in a world where so many multilateral institutions are under so much assault and so much pressure. And I just think the need for those of us who believe that the world still needs people of good faith, goodwill, to come together in cooperative ways and to try to work together, that this is a moment when the importance of that is really, really high. And we can't shrink or fade because there are a lot of forces telling us to shrink and fade. And I think we really need to resist doing that.
Brian talked about how we need to change the system, and AI is changing the system. And so what we need to do is to make sure that it changes the system for good. And I think that's the number one reason why people of faith need to be at the policy table, especially when we talk about AI. It can help us solve some of these problems. It can help us make sure that there's no more food inequity, that poverty doesn't happen, all of these things. It is a tool, and a very powerful tool. And so one of the things that I feel very strongly about AI is that as we move forward, it can also be the ruination of what we're trying to do as a society. It can ruin communication. It even make some of these amazing polarizations that we're seeing even more polarized. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we become a part of the conversation and that we are a strong part of that conversation. I've been so impressed with so many religious leaders who have come out very specifically about AI. I mean, we see it with the Pope. I already talked about Pope Francis, but also Pope Leo has been very strong in what's been happening at the Vatican, but also all religious leaders. I know in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have been looking and tackling this problem very, very much on the ground. And I think that all religions, all of us as interfaith, also have to make sure that we have a voice when we talk about AI and what is it going to do in our homes, what is it going to do to us individually, but also how is it going to affect our religious communities, but also our governments and the world.
Thank you. I think pretty much every social good that we've won around the world, that the faith community bears a lot of responsibility for. And I think we've seen time and time again when the faith community has come together, it literally can move mountains. On Christmas Eve in 2024 with Pope Francis and major religious leaders, we launched campaigns in 160 countries with over 200 faith traditions and groups for the next 5 years, focused on debt relief and economic aid to change the financial system, to shift the economy to ensure that no child goes to bed hungry. And by focusing on these technical policies, the power of the faith community in the early 2000s got signed more than 30 million petitions from around the world in churches, synagogues, and mosques. And it's had a very, very powerful impact on what the interfaith community can do together. I'm going to share a story to close that on a panel in South Africa for the G20 with Reverend Russell Brooks, a member of the House of Lords. We were on the Jubilee panel together. And he shared a story about the early major wins that we won in the early 2000s when David Cameron was the head of Treasury. He was the Lord Chancellor of the Queen's Purse. They have a more sophisticated term for Treasury than we do. And so David was there. They, as governments around the world, were receiving hundreds of thousands of postcards from people of faith around the world, urging them to take action. When the G7 and G20 had said, no, we won't take action, but the faith community moved them. And David's assistant came in and he said, Lord Chancellor Cameron, we have a postcard on Drop the Debt that came in that we wanted you to see. And he goes, we're getting hundreds of thousands of postcards. I don't need to see one of the postcards. Trust me, Lord Chancellor, you're going to want to see this postcard. Hands it over to David. David looks at the postcard and it said, David, please drop the debt. Love, Mom. The faith community is so deeply entrenched on these issues and bears such strong responsibility. The faith community can move mountains and will move mountains on this and other issues so that no child goes to bed hungry.
Imam.
There's a saying of a prophet that humanity, like people who boarded the ship, and the ship have a upper deck and lower deck. People in the upper deck have fresh water, but refuse to give to the people in the lower deck. The people in the lower deck decided to make a hole in the ship to get their own water. North and the south. We need to make sure to save the ship by feeding every human being.
Thank you very much. Well, please join me in thanking the panel. We thank all of you for being here. As I say, we're looking for expressions of interest and ideas. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to being in contact with many of you more. Thank you.